Hello and welcome to another episode of Agri Art. Botany as a discipline is still relatively new in the history of the sciences. This practice had its start in the monasteries and in the gardens of the upper class, and royalty before colleges, universities, labs, and botanical gardens took their place. One of the most interesting pieces of agronomy history is the work of the Portuguese in the acclimatization and dissemination of oranges from Asia to Portugal and from there across the Old and New World. Indeed, in times gone by, Portugal was the major breeder of citrus, in charge of several cultivar trials and breeding multiple different citrus hybrids. This video will cover the domestication of the oranges in the Al-Andalus, the rural and monastic garden, the adaptations made to make citrus suited to Portuguese climates, and the dissemination of this crop to the rest of the world through Portugal. One of the documents my source has used is the Agricultura de Jarnas, published in 1592, a period in which Portugal shared the same king with the Spanish Empire, King Philip. This is a story of how citrus went from Asia to the New World. Let's get started. The earliest known form of citrus came from the southern slopes of the Himalayas, in northeastern India. It was through trade of Rome that the citrus reached the Iberian Peninsula, and from the 11th century onwards, the existence of different citrus cultivars being bred was acknowledged by several books between 1080 and 1450. Using this knowledge, it is likely that the orange was introduced to the Iberian Peninsula during the second half of the 11th century. Afterwards, the bare basics of the history are well known. The presence of orange trees was referenced in the central locations of Al-Andalus, both in the areas of religious and regional political power, such as Cordoba's mosque. It was through the interaction between Al-Andalus and the Arab Mediterranean regions, such as Spain and Portugal, that citrus species entered into these regions. This occurred between the 11th and 13th centuries. Over time, this orange would become a symbol and popular staple in gardens in both nations. Indeed, in Portugal, it became used as an ornamental and a food crop, and a symbol of Portugal as well. An example of this is the book In Its Relation of the King of Portugal, written in 1701. This was written by the English traveller Thomas Cox, who defined in his book the Portuguese gardens as great parcels filled with orange and lemon trees, as well as other fruit trees and herbs used in the kitchen. End quote. Still other writers from Germany and the rest of Europe also wrote extensively about the citrus gardens of that region. This is further confirmed through the use of archaeology to discover invoices for citrus trees and garden and orchard design plans that made citrus a chief part of the design. These invoices date to the mid-1430s. Other documents include garden rental contracts by different groups ranging from tailors to nobility, and one such invoice was a series of payment orders to show that grown orange trees were bought by the monastery of St. Clair in Estremoz, both in 1520 and 1521. The evidence found suggested that only a small number of orange trees were growing in each garden early on. This would however change, and by 1610 the citrus became the predominant crop within Portugal. This is quite interesting since oranges became so common in Portugal. However, across the rest of Europe, it was a rare commodity. This stems from the already built-up botanical and horticultural knowledge of these species, obtained through the use of citrus in gardens long before any other nation would do so, on such a wide scale, at least within Europe. This ultimately allowed for the transition from their cultivation in small-scale gardens to large-scale plantation. In a sense, the garden represented an intermediary stage between novelty plantations to a fully commercial crop. This is based on a survey and study of art of garden treatises circulating in Portugal between the 16th and 18th centuries. Two figures, Gabriel Alonso de Herrera and Gregorio de los Rios, were both Portuguese farmers within Granada, the latter of which worked under King Philip himself, King Philip being the King of Spain and Portugal. It is through Mr. Los Rios that citrus was introduced to Granada. And his book, Agricultura de Jarnas, represents a turning point in the history of gardens and landscape. He was the first to separate gardens from agricultural fields, because back in the day, farming and gardening were considered the same thing. Mr. Los Rios split these into two separate disciplines, a process that would be codified later on by the French author Jacques Baycot in 1638. The acclimatization process in Portugal was done by first growing these plants in pots to gradually adapt these trees to the environment before planting them in the ground. This allowed for ease of transition from the warm greenhouse to the Portuguese climate proper. As for the cultivation process, there is evidence of irrigation in the larger orchards. The Portuguese also codified the methods of grafting and breeding different cultivars and hybrids of citrus, the most famous being Aratium ostopolensis. The introduction of the sweet orange from China into Europe through the scope of the Portuguese maritime expansion was also a major event in Portugal. Over time, the citrus reached its zenith in the 18th century, as citrus paintings and dedicated greenhouses or less hardy lineages would be developed and expanded. Northern European countries would also become fascinated by the citrus family, and these nations would receive a great deal of these cultivars and species from Portugal, and likewise have dedicated greenhouses that would spread across the north in the 17th and 18th centuries. The export of Portuguese orange trees and oranges would continue up until the 19th century. The Portuguese also spread oranges to their colony, mostly Brazil, and it's from Brazil that the orange tree was then taken to California and Florida. The rest, as we say, is history, and Florida oranges and California oranges are still a main staple in modern times. And that about covers everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you really enjoyed it and think you can donate, you can do so at Buy Me a Coffee, link in the description below. Thank you for watching.